Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
The acrylic portion of a removable appliance serves several purposes. First, the acrylic serves to hold the springs and the clasps of the appliance into close contact with the teeth. Secondly, it provides some degree of anchorage to balance the tooth-moving forces through its frictional contact with the palate. And also, the acrylic may serve as a bite plane or as a space maintainer to fill an edentulous tooth space. In this presentation, I'm going to demonstrate a technique that can be used for placement of acrylic on a removable appliance. After the wires have been completely formed, the first step is the waxing of the springs and the clasps to the work model. On the typodont, it is necessary to block out the undercut areas with pink baseplate wax. This will allow the acrylic to draw off the model when it's hardened. The springs and clasps are secured to the work model with sticky wax. The sticky wax is applied at the occlusal crossing points of the Hawley labial wire, the Adams clasp, the circumferential clasp. The finger spring is boxed in with pink baseplate wax and sticky wax. The boxing in procedure creates a little room, a little space for the spring to activate. It allows free movement of the helix and the spring arm as it moves through its activation in moving that molar to the distal. A line is drawn halfway up the lingual surfaces of the anterior teeth. This marks the point where the anterior bite plane will end. After your model is prepared this way, you place it in water for, 10 minutes or so to drive off all the air bubbles in the plaster model. When the air bubbles are all through coming out of the work model, you dry the palatal surface of this work model with air, and then from your acrylic kit, you're going to apply some liquid separating medium. Now, in your acrylic kit, there is a bottle of cold cure acrylic monomer, a small bottle for placement of the monomer onto the work model with the dropper there. There is a large jar of co-ortho resin powder, a small plastic bottle of co-sep liquid separator, and a larger plastic powder dispensing bottle for the resin powder. Now, it is the co-sep that you apply first to the work model. This is applied with a paintbrush. You apply a thin coat of this separating medium over the entire palatal surface of the work model. You also apply it to the teeth, any place where there is a possibility that the acrylic may come in contact with the work model. The separator serves to prevent the acrylic from sticking to the work model. You want to try to place this separator on there so that there's a thin, continuous coat with no missed spots. You want to try to keep the separator free from lumps on the work model surface, and you want to keep it off the wires if you possibly can too. Now this liquid separator is applied after the wires are waxed in place, usually. Sticky wax will not stick very well to a model that already has separator coated on its surface. The placement of the acrylic on the model starts with the addition of powder from the plastic dispensing bottle. You add powder covering the wires of one of the clasps to start with. It doesn't matter where you start. I'm starting in the back portion. And with this dropper, you add the monomer, wetting the powder slowly. Add enough monomer so that the powder is completely wetted. Let the monomer flow to wet all the powder before you add more powder. Do one small area of the palette completely before you continue on to the next portion. What you want to establish is a thickness of acrylic that is 1 to 2 millimeters all over. You add an excess of powder always in this procedure, and you can pat it down with your finger in that manner and then dump off the excess powder. Adding excess powder will keep the acrylic in position and prevent it from flowing down into the palatal vault area. Now, using that same procedure, you add a 1 to 2 millimeter thickness of acrylic all the way around this palatal surface. The acrylic has been added to the entire palatal area now. There's about a 1 to 2 millimeter thickness over the entire surface of the palate. Now you add the bite plane portion to this acrylic by bulking up the powder and liquid additions just behind the incisor teeth. Now you add the acrylic so that it ends up to be quite a bit more occlusal than the pencil line that you originally drew on the model, because you can trim back the acrylic during your finishing procedures to that pencil line halfway up the lingual surface of the anterior teeth. So it's best to add an excess amount of acrylic. Eventually you want to end up with a bite plane that is 4 to 5 millimeters wide. It's easy, of course, to grind off the acrylic if you have an excess. If you don't have enough, it can be a problem to add more. So if anything, I would say to bulk up this bite plane area an excessive amount. Now we've added an excess of powder, and we can now trim this acrylic with a lab knife or a scalpel. You trim around the lingual surfaces of the posterior teeth and remove the excess or flash of acrylic in this part. You trim the posterior aspect of the model halfway back on the second molars, across, halfway back mesiodistally, and you can remove the excess acrylic. The bite plane area is trimmed in the same manner. You come across, just as I'm doing here, and trim off a bit of the excess I would say that you shouldn't trim it down to the pencil line, but if you could trim it just occlusal to the pencil line, it would save you some time in the final finishing procedures. The last step is to wet the surface once again with the monomer completely and smooth it with your finger. And in smoothing it with your finger, you can, if you feel an area, say in the palatal vault, that is too thick, you can, by pushing on the acrylic, thin it down somewhat. Now, at this point, you set this aside to cure on the bench by itself, or you can set it into a bowl of lukewarm water. This will speed the curing process slightly. When the acrylic is hard to the touch, you pry it off of the work model using a hand instrument. You pry a little bit under the clasp, a little bit under the palatal portion on both sides, working around the model with very gentle forces. You pry this appliance off of the work model. With the hand instrument, you clean off the excess acrylic and all of the sticky wax as much as you possibly can. I'm only going to do one small section here. You want to first trim the acrylic as it contacts, at the point where it contacts the lingual surface of the posterior teeth, right in here. I'm going to mark with this white pencil the junction where the palatal tissue meets the enamel of the posterior teeth. With an acrylic burr, you grind away the acrylic until it's 1 to 2 millimeters thick in this area of contact with the lingual surfaces of the posterior teeth. The interproximal area right in here of the acrylic is left as is. It's left pointed. This chart here shows the contact relationship of the acrylic to the work model lingual surfaces of the posterior teeth. The acrylic that contacts the bicuspid and molar teeth lingual surfaces is 1 to 2 millimeters thick, as I said, and it is tightly adapted to the tooth surface. The close contact of the acrylic to the tooth prevents the impaction of food between the retainer, the removable appliance, and the enamel of the tooth, and also the frictional contact of the acrylic to the tooth helps to retain the appliance in the mouth. After the contact areas of the acrylic to the lingual surfaces of the teeth have been ground down to be 1 to 2 millimeters, the entire palatal surface then is smoothed as needed with acrylic burrs in this manner. You can also use acrylic stones, or gemstones as they're sometimes called, for this procedure. The acrylic burrs tend to cause little scratches, little gouges in the acrylic surface, and this acrylic stone will produce a little smoother surface. Now the bite plane area right up here is ground down for this exercise to be 4 to 5 millimeters wide. It's to extend from the cuspid, the distal of the cuspid on one side to the distal of the cuspid on the other side. The plane of the bite plane should be parallel with the occlusal plane. So with the acrylic burrs and the acrylic stone, you grind down this bite plane until it's the way you want it to be. This drawing shows a cross-section of the bite plane acrylic. The acrylic extends halfway up the lingual surface of the incisors and the cuspids. The bite plane itself is 4 to 5 millimeters wide, and it's formed so that it is parallel with the occlusal plane. The acrylic sweeps down onto the palate to be 1 to 2 millimeters thick, just as it is over the entire extension of the palate in all the other areas. You see the lower incisor occluding on the flat bite plane. Bite planes are not routinely placed on acrylic appliances. They're placed only on those cases where you want the posterior teeth to be out of occlusion during the treatment. We've finished the lengthy procedure of grinding down this palatal acrylic surface to be 1 to 2 millimeters thick in the entire extent of the acrylic. You can see the 1 to 2 millimeter thickness of the acrylic in the posterior extension here. The contact surface of the acrylic to the posterior teeth has been ground down to be 1 to 2 millimeters thick, and you can see how the interproximal areas of the acrylic have been left pointed so that they completely fill the embrasure. The wax has been completely removed from the model. In the area where the helix and the finger spring was boxed in, the finger spring is now free to move through its range of activation. The bite plane has been ground with the acrylic burrs and the acrylic stone to be 4 to 5 millimeters wide, to extend from cuspid to cuspid. The next step is to pumice this appliance. The pumice is used wet. You grab a handful of pumice like this, apply it to the palatal surface, and with a felt cone on the dental lathe, you smooth the surface. Now, it is the pumice that does the polishing and smoothing. It's not the felt cone. So you always have to keep the surface wet with an excess amount of wet pumice. You want to be sure that the acrylic surface is not burned by a dry cone applying dry pumice to the acrylic. I'm going to do just one small section as a demonstration. You wash the excess pumice off in a bowl of water and go to the rag wheel with the Bendick polish. Bendick polish is applied dry. You apply some Bendick polish to the rag wheel, then securely holding onto the model or the appliance so that it won't fly out of your hand, you lightly polish the surface with the rag wheel. This puts a final shine on the acrylic surface. Very often you'll find that after you use the Bendick polish, some small scratches show up on the surface of the acrylic where you missed with your pumice polish. Some of these irregularities are right in this area here, whereas this is a smooth area, properly polished with the Bendicks. You'll have to go back and re-polish some of your surfaces with the wet pumice in exactly the same manner. Rinse off the pumice, dry the appliance again, and go back to the dry Bendicks on the rag wheel until you have all of the scratches and gouges on the surface of the acrylic removed. You continue this procedure of wet pumice and dry Bendicks until the surface is as smooth as you want it to be. The final product acrylic appliance should have close adaptation to the palate and to the lingual surfaces of the teeth. It should be 1 to 2 millimeters in thickness in all areas except the bite plane. All the wires should be completely enclosed in acrylic. The finger spring, however, should be free to move in activation. The bite plane must extend from cuspid to cuspid. It must be 4 to 5 millimeters wide. It must be parallel with the occlusal plane, and it should extend halfway up the lingual surfaces of the anterior teeth. Lastly, the acrylic surface should be smooth and free of scratches or surface defects.
Listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.